The story begins at dawn when one of the maids rushes to check on the young mistress to see if she's awake and ensure everything is in order. The maid's name is Aerin, a girl with an extraordinary appearance. Her striking purple hair and vivid red eyes are incredibly rare. Aerin often walks the hallways alone. However, there's one issue: she's not permitted to wander unsupervised. Mari, who once allowed her to walk freely, now insists on keeping an eye on her, fearing the child might overexert herself. Despite Aerin's insistence that she feels no pain, is in good health, and can even jump around to prove it, Mari remains cautious. She knows Aerin is recovering but believes it's better to monitor her closely to prevent any complications, such as a recurring fever. Aerin herself feels frustrated with the confinement but ultimately agrees to rest, understanding that if anything goes wrong, it will be Nanny Mari who bears the consequences. A single mistake could cost Mari her position, regardless of the circumstances. Aerin carries the surname Brunut, but no matter how often she hears it, she can't quite get used to it. This estate is where she worked as a secretary for 10 years and where Garvin Bro's schemes first began. Even after her reincarnation, she never anticipated becoming so deeply entwined in this place again. The portrait of the late Duke still hangs in the estate, a reminder that Garvik must have claimed the Duke's title earlier than expected. It seems Aerin has been sent back to the time when she was actively working under Garvik. Back then, the three potential successors all had their flaws. The one on the left was overly ambitious, obsessed with honors and success, and left chaos in his wake. The one in the middle, disowned for marrying a woman of low status, tragically passed away 2 years later. The one on the right was a recluse, rarely seen within the estate. In the end, Garvik emerged as the only viable successor. Once secure in his inheritance of the Duke's title, he began committing crimes in secret. He ordered Aerin, his secretary, to execute various financial fraud schemes. She complied, working tirelessly and dedicating herself fully to her tasks. Yet, despite her loyalty and relentless efforts, Garvik reaped the rewards and discarded her without hesitation. During her decade as his secretary, Aerin witnessed countless injustices, including harm and death brought about by Garvik's ruthless actions. She never imagined she'd share the same fate as those victims. She had trusted the Brunut family completely, believing her dedication would be recognized and rewarded someday. But instead, she worked herself to exhaustion, only to be treated as disposable. Her previous life ended in a secluded seaside resort, serene and isolated, a perfect setting for Garvik's plan. Even if she had screamed for help, no one would have heard her. She remembered every word, every glance, every moment of that betrayal. The overwhelming emotions of frustration and anger consumed her as she realized how naive she had been. Aerin had begged for a second chance, but no one showed her mercy. Her end was lonely and cruel. She had no friends, no loved ones, and no place to call home. As her body grew cold, she accepted her fate, acknowledging her own role in the outcome. She realized she had been too trusting, too gullible, and vowed never to make the same mistake again. Meanwhile, Mari tries to distract the young mistress, holding her gently to prevent her from spending too much time on her feet. Mari cares for the child as if she were her own daughter. From the very first day, she has been deeply devoted to her duties, often going above and beyond to ensure the little mistress's well-being. Mari's concern runs so deep that she spent sleepless nights praying and worrying about how to help her recover fully. Despite everything, Aerin remains quietly grateful for the people around her and for the moments of care she receives. Aerin felt incredibly fortunate to have such a caring nanny like Mari. Today, Mari had planned to treat the young mistress to a special dessert, hoping to brighten her day and ease her worries, even if only temporarily. She firmly believed that a child should experience nothing but positive emotions, and even food should bring only comfort and joy. Together, they decided to prepare something delightful: cookies, fresh raspberries, and milk, all items usually reserved as snacks for the estate's servants after meals. However, despite her fondness for the treats in the fridge, Aerin hesitated. She didn't want to take food meant for those who cared for her. Instead, she pretended she wasn't very hungry, though her heart longed for the simple comfort of those small delights. Aerin Bronut was the only daughter of Cologne Bronut, one of the 3 sons of the late Duke. Her father had loved her dearly, but due to his strained relationship with his family, Aerin was never treated as the Duke's proper granddaughter. After her parents' deaths, she was brought to the Duke's estate under the care of Mari. There had been an incident where Mari briefly left Aerin unattended. When Aerin woke up alone early in the morning, she was terrified, having forgotten Mari had told her she would be away. Aerin had been adopted by Garvik the same year she arrived at the mansion. However, by then, her life had already taken a dark turn. Garvik claimed Aerin's adoption was out of goodwill, but those around him suspected ulterior motives. It was widely believed that he adopted her to secure favor with the Duke and had no real intention of caring for her. To him, she was just a tool and inconvenience whenever she required his attention. Even when his nephew lay feverish and close to death, Garvik's anger flared when he was disturbed. Aerin realized with dread that if events continued to unfold as they had in her previous life, Garvik would adopt her again. The same cycle of manipulation, betrayal, and ultimate destruction would repeat itself. She couldn't let that happen, not again. This time, she needed to act, to plan carefully, and to ensure she escaped his grasp before it was too late. Determined to change her fate, Aerin picked up her sketchbook and colored pencils and began to draw. She wanted to understand the reason behind her reincarnation. Why had she returned to this world? Was there a purpose to this second chance? The answers felt hidden, but she was determined to find them. This life wouldn't be easy, she knew that. But having knowledge of the future gave her an advantage. The first time, she had been blind to the dangers, but now she had insight. She would do everything in her power to avoid the devastating emotions and loneliness she had felt before. Above all, she had to prevent Garvik from adopting her again. If necessary, she would make him dislike her so much that he wouldn't even want to see her, let alone live under the same roof. There was no time to waste. Without hesitation, Aerin headed toward the grand library of the Bronut family, the largest and most magnificent library she could access. The library stood in a separate building beside the manor, a symbol of the family's wealth and power. It was filled with books on every imaginable subject, and Aerin had a specific goal in mind. Last night, she had carefully devised a plan, and now it was time to set it into motion. She realized she needed a solid understanding of magical science, a field dedicated to scientifically investigating magical power and creating tools using magic stones as a medium. This branch of science had revolutionized daily life, enabling the empire to flourish and advance rapidly. However, magical tools required vast quantities of magic stones, and the reserves of these precious resources were steadily dwindling. In those days, there was a saying, if one lacked wealth, they would lack magic as well. Aerin knew this knowledge would be crucial for her survival and independence. This time, she wouldn't rely on anyone else, she would carve her own path and rewrite her destiny. Studying magical sciences wasn't even worth considering, it was an incredibly expensive field. Of course, the Bronut family, known for their immense wealth and influence across the empire, could afford it without any hesitation. Their grand library alone was evidence of their resources. Moreover, magical science was the one subject that truly fascinated the person most likely to adopt Aerin. Aerin settled into a chair and noticed a stack of documents nearby. They were filled with intricate formulas and detailed notes. The real challenge wasn't just reading them, it was understanding them. To her, the pages might as well have been written in a foreign language. Without prior knowledge, they were meaningless scribbles. But then, something caught her eye: a name. Geoffrey Bronut. He was the third son of Duke Rafi, an eccentric researcher widely referred to as the Mad Mage Scientist. Geoffrey was known for his reclusive nature, spending all his time in his laboratory, completely absorbed in his experiments. He rarely interacted with anyone at the estate, leaving him isolated and without anyone to share his knowledge with. Just as Aerin was thinking about him, Geoffrey appeared, clearly surprised to find someone in the library. Without a greeting, he immediately demanded that she return whatever she was holding in her right hand. Flustered and embarrassed, Aerin tried to explain that she hadn't meant to intrude, she had simply been curious about something she'd read. But Jeffrey wasn't in the mood for explanations or pleasantries. He was curt and dismissive, making it clear she wasn't welcome. To be fair, Aerin realized she had crossed a line. This was his personal space, and she had been handling his private documents without permission. While Jeffrey's rudeness stung, she couldn't deny that she had made a mistake, too. An idea crossed her mind: what if Jeffrey adopted her instead of Garvik? If she could earn his favor, her problems might be solved entirely. But Jeffrey didn't seem interested in speaking with her, let alone forming any kind of bond. For now, it was best to stay out of his way. Aerin retreated to the farthest table, quietly observing him from behind an open book. She noticed the words Alro magic formula on one of the sheets. Alro was a groundbreaking magical calculation formula that had revolutionized the field. With Alro, it became possible to create magical tools using only a tiny amount of magic stones. However, the formula was so complex and difficult to implement that it had taken years to commercialize. No magical tool of significance had been created without it. Aerin couldn't shake the feeling that this formula might have been developed in Garvik's laboratory in her previous life. After inheriting the family title, Garvik had systematically dismantled the Bronut family's wealth and assets. Real estate, mining operations, merchant guilds, jewelry, and architecture businesses had all crumbled under his mismanagement. Despite the ruin, Garvik had once boasted proudly about the Bronut family benefiting from his visionary foresight regarding the Alro formula. But if Jeffrey was the true source of the Alro formula, then Garvik must have stolen it from him. That thought gnawed at Aerin. If she said anything about the future, she'd raise endless questions about how she knew such details. And yet, the formula was destined to become one of the most important discoveries in magical science. Jeffrey, however, didn't seem to care about fame or fortune. As long as he could continue his research uninterrupted, he seemed content. If he had truly cared about the commercial success of Alro, he would have intervened in her past life when everything started falling apart. Aerin continued to watch him quietly. Suddenly, Jeffrey became visibly agitated. He muttered to himself, frustrated, as if he had hit an insurmountable wall in his work. Aerin had no idea what the problem was, but she instinctively remained still, hoping he wouldn't direct his frustration at her. After a moment, Aerin glanced at the sheet in front of her. Perhaps it held the answer to his problem. Gathering her courage, she approached Jeffrey, holding the paper out to him. But before she could even speak, he snatched it from her hand and told her to stay out of his way. His dismissive tone stung, and for a moment, Aerin regretted trying to help him at all. Jeffrey quickly became engrossed in the paper, seemingly forgetting Aerin even existed. He returned to his work, lost in thought and completely unaware of her presence. Aerin couldn't help but feel hurt by his coldness. He could have at least said thank you. But Aerin wasn't one to give up so easily. She approached him again, determined to capture his attention. Surely, he could spare just a moment to listen to her, it might change everything. Aerin had noticed a mistake in Jeffrey's calculations and approached him to point it out. At first, Jeffrey dismissed her entirely, confident in his intelligence and too proud to consider the possibility that she might be right. With a sharp slap on the table, he ordered her to leave, clearly offended that such a young girl would dare question his work. His irritation hung heavy in the air, and his condescending attitude stung. To him, she was just a child, someone who couldn't possibly understand the complexity of magical science. But Aerin wasn't one to back down. Frustrated and angry herself, she couldn't hold it in any longer and shouted across the library, declaring that his calculations were incorrect in 3 separate places. She even offered to help him fix them if only he'd apologize and listen. In that moment, Aerin felt utterly exhausted by the effort of trying to make him see reason. Without waiting for his response, she turned and ran from the library. But something shifted in Jeffrey's demeanor. The man who had just been so dismissive now seemed to recognize the weight of her words. He called after her, asking her to stop. The next day dawned, and Aerin had purposely spent the previous evening resting. She woke early, stretched lightly in bed, and then suddenly recalled a terrible dream she'd had during the night. Panic surged briefly before she pushed it aside, grounding herself in the present. Sadness crept in as she realized how slim her chances were of having Jeffrey adopt her now. Originally, that had been her plan. If Jeffrey adopted her, Garvik wouldn't be able to repeat the horrors of her previous life. But after yesterday's confrontation, it felt impossible. Still, Aerin realized she needed to speak to Jeffrey again. Even if he was in the wrong, she would have to be the one to apologize. She needed this conversation far more than he did. Determined, she dressed quickly and rushed to the library. There was still so much she hadn't had time to read. But as she opened the door, the last person she expected to see was standing there, Jeffrey himself. She didn't even have to look for him, and that was a relief, as long as he remained calm and didn't scare her like he had yesterday. She noticed the same sheet of paper in his hands that she had given him the day before. It was clear he wanted to say something, and strangely, he even smiled. All this time, he had been wondering about his mistake and wanted to prove that she had no right to reproach him. He explained every line, showed how he solved the formula, and insisted everything was correct, but it has 3 errors. It was as if he had finally met someone he could debate with, and he was genuinely happy about it. To achieve this, he had woken up earlier than usual and even tracked down her room in the massive house. Although it was odd that he kept asking more and more questions to validate himself, there seemed to be another reason, though it wasn't yet apparent. Aerin took the sheet, rechecked everything, and confirmed that there were indeed errors. This was the first time the guy had ever been in such a situation, and he didn't even know how to respond. He was also deeply curious about when she had started following him around and getting into science, which seemed far beyond her age. She explained that yesterday was the first and only day they had met in the library. It was an absolute coincidence. He replied that it would be hard to believe, but he'd try. What baffled him most was how, in just a few seconds, she had managed to spot so many errors, despite his tiny handwriting. For someone her age, it was both impressive and unbelievable. He even suspected that it wasn't the first time she had seen that sheet, which would explain how she figured things out so quickly. These weren't just simple studies one could glance at and understand. Now, she seemed like a unique individual to him. Even he hadn't achieved such successes at her age. Some children are just beginning to talk at that age, and here she was, already grasping advanced scientific concepts. On one hand, it was admirable, but on the other, it stirred envy. This was his life's work, and he couldn't bear the thought of being overshadowed by a child. As she confidently told Jeffrey that she was skilled at calculations, she added, not to mention the highly complicated equation used in the formula. Even the most complex equations still involve basic subtraction and addition. Aerin was curious to see his reaction if she proved it wasn't a fluke, that she was genuinely knowledgeable. She even offered to test her skills with a challenge. Naturally, Jeffrey, intrigued and perhaps a little eager to see if she was bluffing, agreed immediately. He gathered the most difficult formulas and theoretical problems he could find, warning her that even he would struggle with them. "This will be incredibly challenging," he said, his tone serious. "There are pitfalls in every calculation. It might be better not to even attempt it." But Aerin was determined. Jeffrey handed her a stack of formulas, each riddled with complex errors, and tasked her with finding and correcting them. Just like yesterday, Aerin quickly spotted an error in the first formula Jeffrey handed her. It took her mere seconds to pinpoint the mistake, her sharp eyes and quick mind passing the first test effortlessly. Jeffrey, still skeptical, handed her more formulas to double-check. But once again, Aerin breezed through them all with astonishing speed and accuracy. At that point, Jeffrey didn't even bother to verify her work. It was clear she had done something extraordinary, something even seasoned professionals would struggle with over hours or even days. He stared at her, unable to believe his eyes. How could a child, a girl of her age, possess such knowledge? At her age, he could barely count to 5, let alone understand magical formulas. Aerin waited, curious about what he would do next. In her past life, she had been recognized as a prodigy, gaining the sponsorship of the Bronut family due to her rare talent. It seemed those abilities had carried over into this life as well. After a moment of silence, Jeffrey announced that he'd be leaving for now, promising that they would see each other again. Aerin mentioned that she might return to the library tomorrow, but Jeffrey told her not to come, at least not then. He had tasks to complete, and her presence would only be a distraction. However, he added, almost casually, that starting tomorrow, Aerin would officially become his assistant, whether she liked it or not. Aerin was taken aback. Becoming his assistant wasn't part of her plan. While she had hoped to grow closer to Jeffrey, she hadn't anticipated taking on such a role, especially one that was unlikely to come with any form of payment. This felt more like an obligation than a choice. Before she could protest or even process the situation, Jeffrey was already rushing off, muttering about preparations and tasks. But then, just as he was leaving, he paused and asked an unexpected question: "What do you like?" The question was so vague that Aerin didn't understand at first. It turned out he was asking about food, specifically, snacks. He wanted to know her favorite treat so he could get it for her. Aerin hesitated. She wasn't used to asking for things, especially not from someone who owed her nothing. Most of the snacks she liked were expensive, and she didn't want to burden him. After some thought, she settled on a modest choice: biscuits with any filling. They were simple, easy to find, and not considered a luxury. Jeffrey seemed surprised by her modesty. He had expected a long list of extravagant requests, perhaps a tower of multi-tiered cakes or rare delicacies. Instead, Aerin's polite and humble answer left a positive impression on him. As he departed, Aerin felt a mix of nerves and uncertainty. It felt as if she had forced him into making her his assistant, even though it had been his idea all along. This arrangement didn't fit into her plans at all. The thought of working tirelessly day and night, with no weekends and overwhelming responsibility, brought back memories of her past life's mistakes. But she quickly shook off her doubts. Thinking negatively wouldn't help her now. This opportunity, unexpected as it was, could be the chance she needed. If she played her cards right, she might win Jeffrey's favor, and maybe they could even work together as equals someday. Despite her promise not to return to the library, Aerin found herself knocking on the library door again. To her surprise, Jeffrey opened it and let her in without even asking who it was. The library looked entirely different from before. Everything was clean and polished, as if a team of maids had spent hours restoring every corner. The furniture gleamed, the books were dust-free, and the atmosphere felt bright and welcoming. Jeffrey apologized casually about one of the chairs being slightly out of place, promising to ask the head butler to replace it with something better. He insisted that nothing subpar belonged in a place like this. Before getting back to work, Jeffrey asked Aerin to wait patiently for a moment. He had something to finish, but he also had a surprise for her. On the table sat a covered tray. "Don't be shy," he said. "Go ahead and open it." Aerin hesitated, wondering if this was some sort of test, perhaps a way to gauge her intuition or patience. After a moment, she carefully lifted the lid. Inside was a delightful assortment of biscuits in a variety of flavors. They looked far better than she had expected, and she could almost taste their sweetness just by looking at them. But then, as she examined the plate more closely, she noticed something else, something hidden at the center. It wasn't just biscuits. There was something even more special waiting for her underneath. When Aerin lifted the lid fully, she realized Jeffrey hadn't just brought biscuits. There was an enormous cake decorated with vibrant berries and smooth, pink strawberry cream. It was clear he had gone out of his way to make this special. A strawberry cream cake. Aerin's breath caught in her throat. She had never even dreamed of tasting such a cake, not even on her birthday. Jeffrey, noticing her hesitation, encouraged her not to hold back. "This cake is all for you," he said. "You're not leaving until you've had your fill." The first bite was heavenly. The cake was soft, the strawberry cream rich and smooth, and the berries fresh and bursting with flavor. The scent alone filled the library, creating an almost magical atmosphere. Every bite felt like a dream. Aerin was more excited than she had ever been at any holiday party. Lost in the bliss of the moment, she forgot about everything, her goals, her plans, and her worries. Right now, there was only the cake and its incredible taste. She ate in silence, savoring every bite, and didn't even notice how quickly she had devoured the entire thing. Jeffrey turned to look at her, slightly wide-eyed, noticing the empty plate. In mere minutes, Aerin had finished the whole cake. She hadn't even realized it herself. Embarrassed, she apologized and explained that it was simply the most delicious thing she had ever tasted. If she could eat a cake like this every day, she said, she would be the happiest person in the world. Jeffrey abruptly turned away, muttering something about etiquette. He pointed out that one should always clean their face before speaking, as it wasn't exactly pleasant to see someone covered in cream. His tone was sharp, almost rude, and Aerin felt a deep embarrassment wash over her. She glanced at her reflection in the back of her fork and realized her face was smeared with cream and crumbs. Quickly and discreetly, she wiped herself clean, thanking him quietly for the advice. But the mood had shifted, and she felt too awkward to look at him again. Jeffrey broke the silence by asking if she wanted anything else. Aerin shook her head and assured him she was full, it was more than enough. But the advice kept coming. Jeffrey sternly told her that she shouldn't eat like it was her last meal. If she was going to be his assistant, she would have full access to these kinds of snacks every day. There was no need to rush or overeat. All the while, he avoided looking directly at her, as if the mess from earlier still lingered in his mind.